All right, so the whole deal today is going to be trying to figure out why the heater in this car sucks. Things I've checked is this damper here. If you open the glove box, there's that little panel there that's already removed right here, and you can actually reach the damper for this blend door. And I messed with that, and I can hear it hitting the housing or something in there, so I'm pretty sure the heater blend door is actually going to full heat, so I don't think that's the problem. I do have airflow. This switch is already broke again. I don't know what is the deal with it. It only works on high, but even still, I have good airflow and still don't have much for heat. So it's got to be, in my mind, a flow issue. Either I'm not getting air through the heater core or I'm not getting enough coolant through the heater core. So getting at the heater core seems like it's going to be a lot more difficult than checking coolant. So I'm going to go ahead and drain some coolant out of it and start looking at some things in the cooling circuit to the heater core. One of those cheap tools I just refuse to throw away for some reason. I mean, it always works and I've used it forever, but it does make a mess. All right, so the path for coolant flow is pretty simple here. We have hot coolant supplied by the engine from this port way back here on the intake. Doesn't really matter where it's at as long as it's the coolant leaving the engine. This one just happens to be here at the back. So you have hot coolant that comes up, it loops around, and it's going into the heater core here. And comes out of the heater core right next to it, and it goes to the cold side of the radiator. It could also go to the suction side of the water pump. It would do the same thing. So these are two different sizes so that hopefully you can't get them mixed up, or at least they should be two different sizes. I guess we'll find out if it actually is. I'm going to go ahead and get this hose off first because this fitting here, at least on Rock Auto, was listed as a check valve of some kind. So I want to look at that guy and just see if there's any kind of obstruction in there, because that's something that's a lot easier to check than the heater core. Well, the 3-year-old heater hose split, so good to be replacing that because you can't buy anything. This guy I definitely had messed with, and I think I put this on 3 years ago, which would make sense that this is only a 3-year-old part by all the finish that's coming off of it, but it had thread tape on it that I would have put on it. But as you can see, there is no check valve. It is just a straight pass through. And I poked my finger down in the port there, and I didn't feel anything that could have been blocking it up. No corrosion buildup, no nothing there. So unfortunately, that is not the problem. So next, I'm gonna try moving on to I'll probably move on to this side of the radiator, make sure this side is clear. That's the next easiest thing to check. All right, well, unfortunately, that's clear. I poked something through until I hit the transmission cooler. And I don't see anything obviously wrong here. So pretty much I'm gonna go ahead and start pulling the heater core out of it. All right, so step one to getting the heater core out is get all of the easy to access bolts and then tear the entire dash apart to get the one remaining bolt out. In this case, there was one bolt right down in there. All the other ones I was able to get out. Somebody has definitely been here before because there's some bolts on this side that they thankfully did not bother to put back in. But they did put that one top one in, so that's why all this is torn out. So that allowed me to get this plastic piece out finally. I realized another issue this thing's having. This spring-loaded bracket is clearly supposed to be bolted right there, but it has no bolts holding it, so that's a problem. And it appears that this damper down here for the floorboards doesn't move. It is pretty well stuck in place. I can't even pry a screwdriver under it, so I'm not sure what's going on with that, but we'll deal with that later. This says Spectra on it, so it's definitely aftermarket. Somebody's been in here before. I did find a 1967 quarter in the duct, so this is already turning around. In my case, there are these little straps that hold the heater core in. It's just got a bolt on either side. So I'm gonna fight to get those guys out and then pull this heater core. Also had to take off this little side panel in order to actually get a tool onto the bolt retaining the heater core. And if you'd like, you can continue taking out the rest of the dash to get the upper bolts, but I didn't feel like doing that. So this one I was able just to bend it out of the way a little bit, and then I bent this one out of the way and pulled the heater core out without having to undo those top bolts. Not gonna lie, it wasn't looking real good that this heater core was the problem, but I stuck the bore scope down there, and that is supposed to be the beginning of a tube. Looks pretty well full of something to me though. All right, it's not as bad as I was hoping it was gonna be, but you can see it definitely has some stuff in it. This side's all right. You can see some light through there. This side's got some stuff in it. That tube there is about 50% blocked with something. So I'm thinking it's stop leak. A lot of this stuff, it's either rock hard or it's it feels like putty of some kind. And given that this has been replaced, I bet what happened is the guy put stop leak in it to try and seal up the original heater core. And then when that didn't work, he forgot to flush it before putting this heater core in. That's my guess. Since then, I've gone through the whole cooling. This is the last piece of the cooling system that I haven't touched. I had the water pump off of it. Actually, I replaced the water pump, now that I think about it. I replaced the water pump, the hoses, the radiator. This was the only part of the cooling system I didn't touch. So hopefully if there was any trash left in the system, this caught it. So the heater core is in. I went ahead and turned the fan on just to see how much air, or see where the air was going. And that damper, or the blend door for the heat and cold, wasn't actually diverting all the air through the heater core. There was a significant amount of air that was skirting around that door because the cable wasn't holding constant pressure on it. So in trying to address that, I now have more of the dash torn apart. It was super nice of GM to not leave any slack in the vacuum lines that connect to this. So this is about as far as I can pull it out, which is great. But when I took this apart, it was evident that, it's hard to see, where's it at? That red thing right there, that's the end of the, I guess the sheath around the cable. That was no longer screwed into the bracket. So you can see there's the screw, kind of the shiny thing. So I think somebody's been in here before, because the screw that came out of that was really short and it couldn't actually hold the sheath of the cable in place. So it popped out and the cable was just kind of flopping around. So I put that in, sunk a deeper screw in there that actually grabs it the way that it's supposed to. So that, I think, fixed that. And over here on this end, you don't connect, or the damper wasn't connected to the actual end of the cable. It was connected to this piece here that can slide a little bit. And I think somebody, either intentionally or otherwise, adjusted this to account for it being loose on this end. So I had to readjust this and pushed it way out. And now, if I put it back together, it should actually go full heat and full cool and not be mixing the air. I've got it on cool. Pretty much nothing coming through the heater core. Bunch of air out over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and move the damper. Got a bunch of air coming through the heater core. And I've got very little bypassing the heater core. So I think that's about as good as I'm gonna get it. Another thing I did, kind of as a fix from the last guy, the seal that's supposed to seal up the hole in the firewall that the lines run through, it's a decent sized hole, and it was just wide open. So you had hot or cold air, depending on how hot or cold it was in the engine bay, blowing right through this big hole in the firewall, bypassing the heater core and blowing into the car. So that's not ideal. So I don't have a seal handy, and I need to get this back together. So I just cut up pieces of this rag and packed it all around that hole to seal it up. At the very least, it's way better than it was. So now I think I'm in a position where I can go ahead and put all this lower stuff together before I lose the 500,000 screws that hold it. I'm going to use this heater hose. It's the Gates green stripe. You can just see by comparison here. They are radically different thicknesses. The green stripe hose is way thicker, it's stiffer. So it's kind of a pain in that it can't make as tight of bends as this hose can. But I really think it's going to hold up a whole lot better in the long term than whatever garbage that was. And I have a ton of this stuff. I found this stuff for sale on clearance, and I think the listing was actually messed up because for a quantity of one, it said $1.34 or something like that. And it said they had 2 quantities in stock. So usually hose is priced by the foot, or at least everything else that this company was selling was priced by the foot. So I assumed I was going to get 2 feet of this hose, and that's what I was going to do the Suburban with. What actually showed up was like 2, I don't know what this is, 25-foot spool at least. So I now pretty much have a lifetime supply of heater core hose. So every time I get into something like this, I'm just going to go ahead and replace them. Well, the good news is the heat works pretty good. And I think I might be figuring out what's going on here with this switch. So, kind of hard to tell, but the connector on the right is a slightly different color than all the others. And looking at the plug here, that brown wire looks a little charred. And I think it actually at some point got hot enough to melt itself out of the connector. The metal clip is actually not clipped into the plastic anymore. It's just kind of flopping around in there. So I think this thing at one point had a bad enough connection to get concernably hot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut, I ordered another plug and another switch. I'm going to leave this switch since it might be okay, and I'm going to go ahead and splice in the new pigtail and see what that gets me. Well, I plugged the new switch in, and I still only have high. Firing the parts cannon isn't working on this one. All right, folks, place your bets. Which relay is going to be the one that actually works? This one, which does say USA on it, that I bought through Rock Auto maybe a year ago. Actually, probably not even that long, honestly. I think it was earlier this summer I started having problems and it's now fall. So not even a year-old relay. Or the dirty, disgusting original one to the car, 30 years old, and all I did was take the cap off, sand the contacts in it, and put it back together. Let's find out. I got it plugged in now, so we can see if it'll work better than the newer one. All right, let's see what's what. All right, low, medium, high. So finally, that works. So I think what happened is I replaced that old relay, this one here, because I kept having this weird problem where I would turn the switch on, but nothing would happen until I came out here and flicked the relay, and then the blower would come on. So I thought maybe this guy was bad, so I cleaned the contacts in it, tried it, it still didn't work, so I bought this new one, and that fixed it for several months. What I think the problem was the whole time, oh, and I also had, when the problem came back, I then cleaned the plug in the dash that goes to the switch, and that fixed the problem for, again, like another few months until now. And I think the plug going to the switch was the problem the whole time, and now this part is actually bad after however many months. So I don't know, firing the parts cannon at this and not really troubleshooting it well has not worked out in my favor on this one. But thankfully, I hoard old parts for some reason, and it worked out in my favor this time. So I'll throw this one back in the spare parts box with bad written on it, because of course I'm not going to throw it away because it worked on at least one setting. And we'll bolt this guy back in service, and we'll see how long it works this time. But it does have heat. The heat actually works really good now. All right, it's dark now. So it cooled off a lot outside. It's about 58 degrees. And this thing's putting out about 155 degree air. So that's pretty solid. Instead of, before I was getting, 40 to 50 degrees of heat, over whatever ambient was. Now the car is getting, nearly 100. So nearly 100 degrees is pretty good. I think that'll be pretty good this winter. So we're gonna go ahead and call this fixed.